Hello and good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to this afternoon's webinar, Germany, a top relocation destination for talent. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us this Thursday afternoon. Before we get into the main presentation, I just want to take a brief reminder and go over some housekeeping items. This webinar will last for about 45 minutes, give or take, and that includes the audience question and answer session. So we encourage everyone to ask some questions if you have them, and you can do that by using the GoToWebinar control box or panel that you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. Type that question in, and we'll get to it either during the main presentation or, again, at the end during the dedicated Q&A section. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded. Everyone in attendance will receive a link to download the recording after today's live session. In that follow-up email, you will also receive a link to download the slide deck. And as a third and final item, you will receive SHRM and HRCI continuing education credits in that follow-up message. Okay, so for nearly 20 years, Envoy has been on a mission to fix the inefficient, frustrating, and confusing immigration process. Envoy combines expert legal representation with innovative technology to deliver the only platform that makes it seamless for companies to hire, mobilize, and manage a global workforce. Envoy secures work authorization in over 150 countries, has grown 41% year over year, and works with over 1,000 customers. We are particularly proud of our NPS score, which is a testament to the employee experience that we provide. I'm very excited this afternoon. We're joined by Global Mobility Solutions. Founded in 1987, Global Mobility Solutions is a global corporate relocation management company that specializes in workforce mobility and relocation technology. The company's corporate relocation programs include global assignment management, domestic relocation management, and a wide range of pre-decision services and consulting services. And our two panelists for today are, first, Hannah Inchan. Hannah is the Senior Global Immigration Specialist for EMEA at Envoy Global. She brings over 15 years of immigration experience. She's a UK qualified solicitor. And prior to joining Envoy, Hannah worked at Barry Appleman, PwC Legal, and other firms, serving clients from startups to Fortune 500 companies. Also joining us this afternoon is Hannah Byrne, Senior Business Development Manager at Global Mobility Solutions. Hannah provides consultative and needs-based solutions for companies seeking to enhance their current program, simplify processes, and lower costs. She also assists prospective clients with responding to requests for proposals, developing relocation policies, benchmarking, client presentation, technology demonstrations, contract negotiations, and more. Hannah and Hannah, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Hi, lovely to be here.
Hi, yes, excited to be speaking with everybody today. Thank you.
Awesome. So going to turn things over briefly. Before I turn things over to Hannah Byrne, I just want to quickly remind our attendees today that the content in this presentation, it is not intended as legal advice. For additional information on the issues discussed, please consult with an Envoy affiliated attorney or another qualified professional. Okay, so we're going to kick things off by looking at the talent shortage in Germany. So turn things over to Hannah Byrne. Hannah, what can you tell our attendees about the talent shortage?
Perfect. Thank you, Eric. So first, kind of starting with the talent shortage in regards to Germany in particular, they do have the oldest population in Europe, along with a low birth rate. So there's changing laws to promote non-European skilled labor entry and welcoming foreign job seekers to Germany. And in addition to that, the legislation ensured that it is easier for employers to bring workers in from outside of the EU. So about 1.2 million jobs remain empty in Germany, thus the talent shortage there. And really it encourages overall immigration efforts and promotes integration programs to increase workforce participation.
Gotcha. So Hannah, moving along, I believe there's an immigration, there's some updates to the immigration law. So what are some of these updates that you're seeing?
Yes, that's correct. So there's two improvements in regards to the bill for the immigration law updates. So first, we have the non-EU immigrants with vocational training, which would have an easier time working in Germany. And also for the second improvement, we have young individuals from third world countries who would be able to apply for a temporary visa to locate training places. But there are worries that the new law will not generate enough skilled workers to meet the demand. In addition to that, with the labor law update to part-time work in particular, there is a draft act on the further development of the law and part-time work. And what this is that it establishes a legal entitlement to temporary part-time employment. So part-time employees are able to freely decide whether they would like to resume working full-time following a part-time employment period, which is also the bridge part-time work.
Gotcha, interesting. So as we move along here, this next slide here, what can you tell our attendees on what we're looking at?
Okay, no problem. So in regards to the social tax contribution limits, there are new ceilings. So the new ceilings for 2019 for pension and health insurance contributions, you can see that below, where for the Western federal states, so the older states, the new ceiling is 80,000 euros. And in regards to the Eastern federal states or the new states, it's just under 74,000 euros. And another thing to note is the freelancing or gig work, which is on the rise, but there are legal risks to working with freelancers and contractors. So that is something to keep in mind.
I just gotcha there. So moving along to our next section here. So Hannah, it sounds like, so as we take a look at this title slide here, that while yes, there are some there is a talent shortage in Germany, the country is still, as you can say, Europe's economic engine. Why is that?
Yes, well, there's a number of factors and government policies that are propelling the German economy and making it one of the strongest European countries or economic countries in Europe at the moment. Such factors include the low unemployment rate in Germany, a highly educated workforce, and tax cuts. The German government have a focused campaign, which they call the Powerhouse Eastern Germany. This campaign promotes and develops Eastern Germany through continuing infrastructure and developments and investment. And encouraging investment into Eastern Germany to build Eastern Germany. There is also, just moving on to the next slide, there is also the introduction of the powerhouse. There's also the introduction of the skilled labour immigration law that Hannah mentioned earlier. It incorporates changes mentioned earlier, which includes a more streamlined immigration process. And that is further encouraging the economic growth in Germany. I'm not going to mention the name. I'm not going to try and read the name of this new skilled labour immigration law because it's a little bit too long for me. But I'm just going to move on to the next slide, which talks about the different immigration options that are available in Germany at the moment.
Yeah, so and by the way, for our attendees, that was Hannah Inchan speaking. So Hannah Inchan, what are some options that if a company is looking to send an employee to Germany, what are some options for relocation?
Sorry, there's a number of different immigration options that we have listed in the slide, but what we're going to do is I'm going to focus on the two more commonly used routes, the EU Blue Card and the ICT. If we can move on to the next slide, that gives us a bit more detail about the EU Blue Card programme. So the EU Blue Card programme was introduced in 2009, and the majority of the EU countries have adopted the EU Blue Card Directive, with the exception of Denmark, Ireland, and the UK. So just a quick fun fact, these three countries are sometimes known as the rebel members, because where they can, they will opt out of any EU-wide initiatives, such as the EU Blue Card and also the more recent EU ICT Directive. The purpose of the EU Blue Card is to allow for non-EU nationals to have a simplified process to live and work in any of the EU countries that have actually implemented the programme. So once a foreign national has obtained a blue card to work in one EU country, the process for them to obtain another EU Blue Card would be a lot simpler if they wanted to move, say, from Germany to work in France or work in Italy under that programme. Just moving on to the next slide, that gives us a bit of the criteria required for to become eligible under the EU Blue Card programme. So the applicant will be required to meet the following criteria. They must have a passport outside the EU. So for example, if they had a Spanish passport, they wouldn't be eligible. They must have been awarded an undergraduate degree or have at least 5 years professional experience. They need to be employed or have a binding offer from a company within a participating EU country. They must be working as a paid employee. So volunteers who will not be paid will not be eligible. And they must receive a salary of at least 1.5 times the average national salary. In some sectors, the salary may be lower, so they may be eligible if they did not meet the 1.5 times the average national salary. So sectors like if you're being employed in the charity sector, for example, they tend to have a lower salary banding. So they could potentially still be eligible for the Blue Card. I'm just going to move on to the next location. So I kind of whizzed through quite a lot of that. The other criteria for the EU Blue Card is that they need to have the necessary travel documents in order, they need to have the relevant health insurance, and they need to fulfill the legal requirements to practice their profession. So for example, if they are going to work in Germany as a lawyer, they need to be qualified as a lawyer. Similarly, accountants and doctors.
Hey, Hannah, quick question here. What are just some examples of the travel documents that someone may need to have in order?
They would have to have a valid passport, for example. Usually, the passport would have to be valid for the duration of the EU Blue Card. The EU Blue Card can be issued for a period from 1 year up to 5 years. They would also have to make sure that they have the employment contract, the insurance details, but generally in terms of the travel documents, it would be the passport. There's some questions over whether a travel document over a passport would be eligible, and that question is still outstanding.
Gotcha. And another question that just came in from our audience, does an employer need to have a sponsorship license to employ someone on a Blue Card?
Not in Germany. And in fact, no, they don't in most countries, because it's not what the EU Blue Card is an EU scheme rather than being a local scheme. So, for example, in the Netherlands, they have to be registered with the Dutch authorities. In the EU Blue Card scheme, that's not a requirement.
Gotcha. Thanks for answering that one. Ready to move on to the next slide here?
Absolutely.
All right, so here we are looking at intra-company transfers. So, Hannah, what exactly is this?
So the EU Blue Card is designed for the permanent relocation or of an employee, or it's designed for a locally hired employee in Germany. But if a company wanted to send an employee to work in Germany for a short-term period, or any period up to 3 years, then they can do so under the intra-company transfer scheme. Under the intra-company transfer scheme, or the ICT scheme, the maximum period that the individual can work in Germany is 3 years if they are a manager or a specialist. But if they're going to work in Germany as a trainee, then the maximum period will be for 12 months. The EU Blue Card can lead to permanent residence in Germany after 5 years. However, an ICT scheme, that will not happen. The ICT permit does not lead to permanent residence. At the end of the 3 years, the individual will have to leave Germany. And in some countries, there is a way to circumvent the rules of having the individual leave the country by utilizing another route. For example, they may switch from an ICT to a Blue Card. So they may switch from being an assignee to a locally hired employee. But under the ICT scheme, 3 years is the maximum period they can stay. So just moving on, sorry.
Oh, no, I was going to say if you wanted to move on to the next slide, but continue.
Yes, I was going to ask if we can move on to the next slide, because the next slide talks about the criteria. I was just going to run through the criteria for an ICT.
Actually, Hannah, sorry, sorry for 1 second. Can you repeat how long the Blue Card is valid for, or can be for?
It can be valid up to 5 years.
Up to 5 years, okay.
Any other questions on the Blue Card?
No, I think it was just some clarification on that one. So yeah, okay. That's the audience question. That are all the audience questions for now. So, hand things back to you.
Thank you. So the criteria for the ICT permit is the company, the German company, and the sending company. So the German company would be the host company, and the sending company could be any other company outside of Germany, for example, the USA or China or India. Both companies need to belong to the same group of companies. So this could be in terms of one being a parent and one being a subsidiary, or both companies could be owned by the same parent located elsewhere. But both companies need to be part of the same group. The assignee must have been employed by the sending company for at least 6 months prior to the assignment. The assignment must be longer than 3 months and can be a maximum of 1 year or 3 years. And they must also earn the minimum salary equivalent to a German national working at the same level. So those are the general requirements for an ICT. Does anyone have any questions regarding the criteria?
Nothing at the moment regarding ICT. So we're going to move along here to the Schengen Visa. What can you tell us about this one?
So the Schengen Visa, it's a visitor visa. It allows the holder to travel to any of the Schengen countries for the purpose of a short visit. There are 26 countries in the Schengen area, 22 are from the EU, and 4 are EFTA members, that's the European Free Trade Agreement members. The UK and Ireland are not part of the Schengen, so their rebels are coming out again. The countries that are part of the Schengen are Australia, Belgium, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Iceland, Italy, Latvia, Liechtenstein, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Malta, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland. The Schengen Visa allows the holder to travel to any of the Schengen countries using a single visa. But the holder cannot spend more than 90 days in a 180-day rolling period in the whole of the Schengen area. So, for example, if an individual traveled to Austria for 4 days on the 1st of August and then traveled to Germany on the 10th of August for another 4 days, that is a total of 8 days out of their Schengen allowance. So they'll only have 82 days left of their Schengen allowance for the next 180 days from the 1st of August. The visa can be obtained from the consulate where the individual is either traveling to first, so the first country they enter when they enter the Schengen area, or where they're spending the majority of their time. Typically, what we do is we advise clients to apply for their Schengen visa at the consulate where they're going to be entering first, because that's the easiest way to demonstrate them meeting that particular requirement. Because within the Schengen area, it's generally an open border. So if they were traveling by train from, say, France to Germany, the individual generally won't encounter immigration control. So it will be difficult to show at what point they actually entered Germany from France. Which is why we advise that if you're flying into France and then traveling to Germany by train, you best apply for your Schengen visa at the French consulate. Because what we have found is that with clients or individuals who travel frequently, if the immigration officer at the border sees that there's a frequent travel pattern, they're unsure about whether you obtained your visa from the correct consulate, the immigration officer at the border, they do have the discretion to refuse you entry. Or if you go to apply for a second visa, the consulate may then question whether you obtained the first visa correctly, and they may then refuse your second application. So always be aware of that situation where the immigration officer at the border or at the consulate, they do have discretion to refuse you either entry, which could happen to a non-visa national, so for example a Canadian, an Australian or a US national, or if you're applying for your visa, the consulate may refuse the application.
Gotcha. Hey, Hannah, just two follow-up questions regarding the Schengen visa. So this individual asks, so to confirm, you apply for this visa on arrival, and what needs to happen ahead of time to prepare for this, if anything?
So there's 2 types of travelers. The first type is what's called a visa national. And these are individuals who need to apply for the visa at the consulate in their home country prior to travel. So before getting on the plane, they will need to have this visa in their passport. Those are visa nationals. You've got non-visa nationals who do not need a visa, do not need a physical visa in their passport before they travel to the Schengen area. For the visa nationals who need to get the visa at the consulate, they will need to submit a full application. This will include documents such as the passport, photos, insurance papers, so evidence they've got insurance, They also need to have invitation letters. If it's a business visit, they will need to provide evidence that they're employed in their home country, so a letter from their employer. They'll need a letter from the inviting company. So if they're going to visit a company in Germany, attend meetings, conferences, they'll need evidence of that. So a letter from the German company, or if they were attending a conference, they would need evidence that they're reserved in the conference, or they've booked a ticket for the conference. So these are the visa nationals. For the non-visa nationals, these are typically your US, Canadian, Australian nationals. They don't need to have a physical visa in their passport before they travel, but they will be stamped. They will be granted entry into the Schengen area when they arrive at the airport, or if they're coming by train. From outside of the free zone area. So, for example, if they were traveling from the US national traveling from the UK, going to Paris via the Eurostar, when they get to Paris, they will be stamped. But if they were traveling from Germany, from France to Germany, that's a free border, that's an open border via train, so they won't get stamped. But these individuals, they'll get a stamp in their passport when they arrive, but they don't need the physical visa. However, both sets of travellers are still subject to the Schengen rules. So they are restrained in what they can do under the Schengen area, under the visa or the Schengen stay. And also they are restricted in their time. And what we typically find is that the visa national will be very conscious of the time they spend in the Schengen area, whereas the non-visa national, your US, Australian, Canadian, will not, because they don't need a visa to enter the Schengen area. They pay less attention to the amount of time they spend there. And typically the non-visa national, they're more at risk of overstaying or spending too much time in the Schengen area, rather than your visa national, who's very, very conscious of how much time they're spending. So be very aware of that. Did that answer the question?
Yes, great answer, great question, great answer. So thank you for taking the time out to answer that question there. So Hannah, I'm going to turn it back to you. Is there any final remarks regarding the Schengen visa?
Just to mention that be aware there are discrepancies between each consulate, because despite the centralized attempts to make policies, processes streamlined across all of the consulates, across all of the countries, there will be discrepancies between each consulate and each country implementing their rules. So when you're applying at the French consulate, it can be a very different process and a very different experience to applying at, for example, the Dutch consulate or the German consulate. What we have found is the Dutch consulates tend to be a little bit more relaxed with the rules. For example, there's a requirement for the passport to be valid for at least 6 months. And if you were a national applying in a country where you don't hold the passport, so for example, you have an Indian national who has a work permit in the UK, they're applying for the Schengen visa in the UK, they should ideally have at least 3 months validity left on their UK residence permit in order to be eligible to apply in the UK. What we have found is that the Dutch consulate are a bit more relaxed with these rules, whereas, for example, the German consulates are very, very strict. They will refuse to entertain an application if your passport's valid for less than 6 months, unless you've got an extremely good excuse. So there are those kind of discrepancies. And just to sort of mention that, there are the visa nationals and the non-visa nationals. You can find a list of the non-visa nationals on many of the Schengen country consular websites. So you'll be surprised at the number of countries or number of nationals who don't need a visa to enter the Schengen area. So if you go through some of the lists, and one of the ones I picked up was Albanian nationals. Albanian nationals who do hold a biometric passport don't need a Schengen visa. So I thought that was a fun little fact for us. So be very, very careful when you're looking at your employees, because it's not your typical employees who need a Schengen visa. Not all of them do. So, always double check the websites before you send someone to the Schengen area.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Sorry. Go on, Eric.
Oh no, no, that was really great. Going to well, I guess any final remarks on the Schengen, or should we open the floor up for some questions?
I'm finished with the Schengen if everyone else is.
Perfect. Oh, sorry there. Moved a little too far ahead. Sorry about that. So as I just mentioned, so now we're going to open up the floor to the audience Q&A. We've already gotten some great questions throughout the presentation, but really we want to have you, the attendees, further drive the discussion. So so as we wait for some more questions to roll in, I'm going to open the floor to both Hannah Byrne and Hannah Inchan, just for some, in your mind, some final remarks, maybe a key takeaway that our attendees can walk away with today regarding sending talent to Germany and some important considerations.
Well, in terms of sending talent to Germany, Germany are looking at simplifying a lot of their processes for German work permits. Currently, there's a requirement to have your educational qualification, what they call equalized by the German authorities, and in the German authorities that conducts this equalization is a confusing process, because there's a number of organizations within Germany that conduct this process, and what the German authorities are looking to do with this new law is to simplify that. They're going to have create a federal entity that will help guide through this process, and help make the process a lot simpler. This government entity, this federal entity, will negotiate and they will speak to each of the individual organizations, and they will, hopefully make that process faster. Because at present, what we are finding is that the German process can be quite lengthy in terms of what happens behind the scenes with the government on the government side, because once you've got a number of different factors that you have to prepare, a number of different documents. Once you've got all those documents, you submit the application, and the application itself will take about 3 weeks to process. The individual gets the work permit approval, and they submit the visa application. The visa application typically takes about 2 to 4 weeks. So that's what the German authorities are looking to do with this new immigration process that they're hopefully coming into force. I think it's going to be sometime next year.
Interesting.
We're just going to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, thanks for elaborating on that. So one question that came in, I'd like to loop Hannah Byrne back in. So Hannah Byrne, can you describe some of the challenges in global mobility today? And then the second part to this question is, how can companies best navigate these challenges?
Okay, sure. That's a great question. In terms of the challenges in regards to global mobility, one of the biggest factors is the topic we're talking about today, which is immigration and making sure everyone's compliant in that regard. So that's a key feature. So first, you can't go on an assignment or a relocation without the proper visa or immigration things in place. So that's topic number one there. But there's a lot of other complex variables involved when it comes to mobility on a worldwide scale. So there's a lot of different services that these employees will need in order to have the best experience when they're moving internationally. So the different variables involved could include the shipping of their household goods if they're going on a longer term assignment, or of course cultural and language training that is definitely imperative, and really kind of helps the employee and foster that successful assignment there. But one really big feature to notate that sometimes people look over is the spousal assistance. So again, if it's more of a long-term assignment or a permanent move, we definitely want to take into account the family because that really hinges on the success of the relocation. So spousal assistance is definitely something to consider when having the international movements within your organization.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that one. Hannah Inchan, I got two questions on the ICT, but before we get there, there is one question on the EU Blue Card. The question is, how long does it take to get a Blue Card visa?
At the moment, it's taking about 5 to 6 weeks. It's taking a rather long time. And that's from submitting the Blue Card visa. Once they've actually got the visa and they are in Germany, then they also have to register with the Foreigners Office, and that process can also take a long time. And that process, trying to get an appointment at the Foreigners Office at the moment is alone taking about 3 to 4 weeks. But the good thing is the Foreigners Office do have discretion to issue the permit on the same day.
Gotcha.
So yeah, it's taking about, I would say on average, about 2 to 3, maybe 4 months.
Okay. So then switching now to the ICT, the first question is, are sponsorship licenses required for ICT or other employer-specific visas in Germany?
Not at present, no. What they need to do, there's 2 routes to applying for the ICT. The first one is to apply for the work permit, and that's applied at I can't remember the German phrase for it. I'm going to call it the employment agency, because that's the English term for it. And you can submit the work permit application at the employment agency. The application is then approved. The individual then takes their work permit approval and submits the visa application at the consulate, the German consulate in their home country. Once they've got the visa, if you've got the pre-approval, then the consulate will generally process the visa a lot faster, and then the individual will then have the visa, have the work permit, enter Germany, and then obtain their residence permit at the Foreigners Office. The other route is not to apply for the pre-approval at the employment agency, to go straight ahead and apply for the visa, the ICT visa, at the German consulate. But the problem with that process is that the German consulate will then refer to the employment agency internally. The employment agency will then give its approval. The visa will then be issued, and then individual travels and applies at the Foreigners Office for their permit. The problem with the second process is that we have little control over the internal process between the consulate and the employment agency. So whereas it may seem like a faster process in that you're applying for your visa quicker or sooner in the process, the actual waiting time, the processing time at the consulate is likely to be a lot longer, because when we submit the employment agency application, we speak to the employment agency and we give them a little nudge, especially in urgent situations, whereas that would be more difficult if it was an intra-government process.
Gotcha. So thank you for answering that one. The second ICT related question, is knowing the German language a requirement or recommended for workers coming into the country on ICT?
It's recommended, but not a requirement.
Okay.
It's more of a requirement when you're applying for locally hired permits like the blue card or the employment permit. But for the ICT, it's not a requisite, and we actually, we don't have many ICT permit holders who speak German, because they do recognise that there is a need for companies to bring assignees to Germany to fill in gaps, or an assignee has a specialist technical knowledge, which is needed in Germany for that particular role. And that's why a lot of the ICT holders tend to be either specialists, so they would be technically trained, or they're managers, so they're senior level employees. They do have the trainee route for the ICT, but that is a maximum period of 12 months. It's designed for newly employed employees abroad, to bring them into Germany to learn about the company, to learn about the German aspect of the company, and to take those skills and that knowledge back to their home country, where they will continue their employment and further progress in their home country.
Gotcha. So I'm going to take a quick break here with regards to questions. We have a couple more to go through, but there are some final housekeeping slides that I would like our attendees to see. So just briefly, we have a couple webinars coming up next week. Looking at the new NAFTA, how the USMCA affects the TN visa. And then on September 24th, we're going to be looking at trends and policies in the Asia Pacific region. So hope to see everyone there. Additionally, please to stay informed of the latest news, webinar invites, and content releases, follow Envoy and Global Mobility Solutions on social media. And as I mentioned at the top of the hour, we got some SHRM and HRCI continuing education credits. So if you would like, you can copy these down real quick, or as I mentioned earlier, they will also be included in tomorrow's follow-up email. So back to the questions. Hannah, one came in, or Hannah Inchan, one just came in. The question is, do spouses have work authorization under the EU Blue Card or company transfer?
That's a very good question, actually. As far as I'm aware, and I need to double check this, so if whoever is asking this question would like to email in the question, we can come back to you on that. I'm pretty sure that they do, because Germany is looking at growing attracting foreign nationals to come and work in Germany. And one of the ways to do that is to allow or make it easier for spouses to come to Germany with the main applicant, the worker. And a lot of countries, and I believe Germany is one of them, allows free reign or open access to the local labour market, as long as they have a valid permit as the spouse of an EU Blue Card holder or an ICT holder. But if you email in that question, we can come back to you to confirm.
For sure, yeah. We'll connect, Hannah, we'll connect you with this individual after the conclusion of the webinar. So, Hannah Inchan, I would say you're over there in the UK, EMEA expert. There's a thing called Brexit going on.
No one's heard of that.
Yeah. So, question for you is, how might Germany's labor workforce be affected by Brexit?
So there is a large number of UK nationals living in Germany and working in Germany. And whilst there's no official guidance or no official laws being passed yet, the UK is gearing up to leave on the 31st of October 2019. A lot of people, myself included, are hoping that this will either be delayed or completely cancelled, but that's what we're gearing towards at present. And the UK, so German nationals living in the UK have a process where they can apply for a permit, and they are there's going to be a transition period. The German authorities have indicated a similar process, a mirroring process, where UK nationals who don't already have a residence permit, so with any EU national who resides in Germany for more than 3 months, need to apply for a residence permit. They need to register with their local authorities or local foreigners office. That process will continue for UK nationals, and the German authorities have also indicated that, again, there will be a transition period for UK nationals who are living in Germany, and it's likely to reflect the same timeframes, deadlines, as the UK government have indicated. But looking at a sort of a wider picture, in terms of how Brexit could affect the German labour force as a whole, what we could see is that companies who are currently headquartered having their European headquarters in the UK could look to move away from the UK, because there will, depending on how the negotiations go, there could no longer be free movement or free trade between the UK and the EU. So what we could see is that a lot of companies could move their European headquarters away from the UK, or they could grow their non-UK offices around Europe. And with Germany being one of the, or if not the strongest, one of the strongest economies in Europe, we could see a surge of companies moving to Germany. That would mean an increased workforce, both locally in Germany and also trying to attract non-European nationals to work in Germany. So we could see huge economic movement in Germany because of Brexit.
It's interesting. It's super interesting. And definitely something we'll keep our eyes out on in the coming weeks and months. So we're at about 2:50 Central Time, so I think it's going to be the final question this afternoon. Hannah Inchan, can you comment on how the German minimum salary requirements for ICT, how that is calculated? And then is there any resource or calculator that someone can use?
No, what we do in terms of showing that there is the individual, the foreign national coming to work on an ICT, has the equivalent salary of an existing German employee in the same role, is the company provides evidence of that. So what they would generally do is they would provide us with a list of the job titles that they have that are similar to the foreign national's job title, and they would provide us with the salary bandings. And that salary banding has to be accurate. They can't just make it up. So, because if the German authorities see the salary bandings, and for example, they have an office administrator who is on 75,000 euros, that's going to look a little bit suspicious. So the salary bandings have to be accurate. Don't forget that they have to be quite senior level or very technical individuals. And so you would expect to see quite a high salary for the ICT holder. But there's no calculation. It's just simply providing the evidence on a piece of paper written down. These are the job titles we have that are similar or equivalent to the ICT job title holder, and these are their salaries. And we know that, and the ICT holder salary matches or similar to that of the German employees. But no salary calculators.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you for answering that one. So that's going to wrap things up this Thursday afternoon. I would like to thank Hannah Byrne and Global Mobility Solutions for joining us this afternoon. It was great to partner with you, Hannah, on this presentation. And then obviously, Hannah Inchan, thank you so much for providing insights on the various visa types and some of the finer details there. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up again. This webinar, the recording will be sent out tomorrow afternoon in addition to the slide deck. So please keep an eye out on your email inboxes for these materials. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend.